overarching point of this module is what gets measured gets done. So we've done all this work, and so we want to close the loop in terms of measuring the effectiveness of our different strategies. So here are our learning objectives as always, so I'll let you just read through those. So in terms of monitoring marketing activity, these are 5 steps. So, what are the standards? What data do we need? How are we going to collect this data? Somebody to analyze and monitor the ongoing activities, and then we can use that data to adjust our strategy and tactics. An old axiom in marketing, or particularly in promotion, is I know I'm wasting half of my promotional dollars, and so I just don't know which half. So part of what we're doing here is trying to figure out what has been effective and what has not. And so that's going to depend on the service or the facility. But collecting this data and getting this data, this is expensive and it's onerous. So we can't track everything. So we want to track a few things, track the smartest things. But always we're going to use this KISS method. So keep it simple. And so with that, part of what we're trying to find out is, are there things that we did that worked better than others, and then to adjust our strategy and tactics in the future. So for all of this, in all of your classes, you've learned about establishing metrics so that you can track, control your business or your service. And so there are several different metrics that we may use with this. Obviously, sometimes our promotional efforts are to raise awareness, but as we were talking about in the Zoom meeting, that the bottom line is we want people to use our service, and we want to increase the profitability of our service. So we'll use some of these metrics to help us with that. One way that we may track is market share. And so what a wonderful thing if we knew, what is the market share of our admissions? What's the market share of our outpatient surgeries? What's the market share of our cancer center visits? And sometimes we actually can get this data. In different states that I've been in, this data was available through the state. They provided it for everyone, particularly on inpatient services. The hospitals, the Metro Council in New Orleans, most of the hospitals participated, and so we could actually get shared data to see how we were doing. And so that's going to be one way. We can purchase data. That is another way. But in addition, that it may be that you're trying to track it through other forms of substitutes of data that you may have available. You may do consumer or market surveys of the area. And so those surveys may tell you how you could ask all the people in your community, where did you go for this kind of service? And they would tell you, you could do estimates that way. So in our measuring system, sure, what are we going to track? How deep are we going to track? Over what time are we going to track? So once again, a point I'm making is that there's expense, whether it's time, it's money, that this kind of tracking requires. So you want to be selective in that. Sales is one way that we can look at. We can track over time. And we set sales quotas, sales goals, and see how we're doing with that. We can look at that in terms of certain kinds of customers, certain segments of customers, product lines, certain geographic regions, etc. Now, with all this, in general, sometimes we have to look, what are we trying to accomplish here? So we always start with that. What are our objectives? And then our measurements are going to reflect what our objectives are. So it's, you could argue it different ways in that, you know, I always kind of saw as my job of getting people through the front door. But in healthcare, from an kind of ethical standpoint, certainly all humans are created equal and are equal. But that's not to say that all patient segments are equal in terms of profitability. So I worked at a Methodist hospital, and our mission was we served everybody, and we were really good about that, and that's something I was proud of. However, we didn't market to everyone. We served everyone, but we did not market to everyone. And so we tried to identify how we could find profitable patients, because back to the Catholic Health Service, no margin, no mission. So you need to have patients that have the higher profitability margins, services with the higher profitability margins, so we can serve those that are less so. Another way to look at that, you can go back to your finance and not just look at profitability overall, but remember that after you've met your fixed goals, and if you're looking at contribution margin, your next patients, you just have to cover variable costs, not full costs. So sometimes you may do some things where for special patients that may not pay as much, but if your fixed costs are already covered and all you need to cover is variable cost, you can accept those patients at a lower price. Medicaid may be a good example of that. If you've met all of your fixed prices in your hospital and you want to look at, maybe the state's going to have some new Medicaid contracts, they're looking at different Medicaid managed care options out there. And so if you could cover your variable costs, those could still provide a contribution margin and add to overall profitability. So you can look through this too. We can look at variance analysis that you've looked at certainly in finance, and we may have pre-established performance targets, and so how are we doing with that? So when you're doing your goals, you may do those on product mix, you may do those on payer mix, and see, okay, we're in this new service, we are trying to attract certain patients, and so how did we do with that? Because I'll tell you what happened is hospitals that ignored this suffered at the expense of hospitals who did not ignore this. And so if you allow your competitors to cherry pick all of your profitable patients away, you're going to be left holding the bag with the less profitable or unprofitable patients. And in the long run, you will not be financially sustainable. So here's just some exhibits on formulas that you could use. We're not using these in this class, but recognize, know that they're there. And so in the real world, if you are trying to prove the worthiness of your strategies, these are some of the variance analysis or formulas you might use. So another aspect that we looked at was in terms of advertising. We also use this kind of analysis for Salesforce. When I was in the hospital, I had two salespeople who reported to me. One was an industrial client liaison, the other was a physician liaison, and they were incentivized and they were paid bonuses based on their success in terms of converting splitters to higher users, generating people in our industrial medicine clinic, that kind of thing. So, so we use it as a control mechanism as well. So here's some ways we want to look at, what happened. We had this service, we had this campaign, we had a ways of measuring it, and we look at, were we successful in that? Now, many of you have talked about the importance of digital marketing in your facilities, and so we want to track that as well. If you're doing web pages, etc., you have what is called stickiness. People come into your page, what's happening on your page, do they stay there, do they link to other things? And so, particularly if you're using an outside company to help you with this, they're not going to just look at clicks, but they're going to look at some of what happened as a result of some of this. Certainly a measure is in marketing is how satisfied are your customers, because satisfied customers are ones that are going out there advocating for your service in the community, and so this is going to be essential. You got to track this. You need to know this this data. What are people out there saying about you? I know some of you had mentioned you like to read reviews of different products. To the extent, there's some question of how many of those reviews are actually real. Are they pulling poor reviews? That kind of thing. But so in general, you want to certainly satisfy your customer, but you need to know what they're out there saying about you, and that certainly includes your physicians as well. Just a quick slide here on what a marketing audit is. If you're taking over a new service, basically a market audit is a systematic review of your total marketing operation. So with this, you want to look at what's going on, evaluate the objectives, the policies, how well it's going, and so we call that a marketing audit. All right, so we are about done. We're about done with the whole term. So hope things have gone well for you, and this brief lecture helps you to finish up that last part of your project.